Hello, in this video I want to talk about culture and how that is more important than the actual system a country or a region is in. For example, let's start with the recent event in Sweden. Some migrants between the ages of maybe 15, 16, probably older, they are lying about their age anyway. They raped a fellow migrant, and the only thing they got was this sort of detention service people get who are under the age of 16 or 18 or something. And that goes back to a law in Sweden, back to the days when kids actually had respect for authority and so on, because they don't want to ruin the life of someone who is too young to know what's in their best interest. But as we see, this is a crack where these men fall into, and they can stay in Sweden. They won't be deported back to Afghanistan, and they will be released. And what good can they offer Sweden? The first and foremost thing you do when you come to a new country is not to rape anyone or something like that. So let's go to Afghanistan right now. I read articles about US soldiers being forced to keep quiet about the rape culture that's in the Afghanistan society, and this is on the sort of rebel side. So I'm not talking about the Talibans, I'm talking about the side that US, Sweden, Bosnia, all these Western UN countries support. Now, and you can see that in the documentary by Vice that was published 4 years ago now, in 2013. I'll link to that below, where an officer says, like, okay, if they are not going to fuck these young boys, are they supposed to fuck their old grandmothers? And that is sick, that is repulsive, and that's their culture. In many of these countries which have very separated female and male, for our standards that's primitive. And my point is that even this sort of moderate version that the West is backing up in Afghanistan isn't that moderate. It's still repulsive by our standards. So why are we there anyway? Well, that's another chapter, a book, that has to do with resources, opium and interests and all that. But anyway, so when we talk about multiculturalism, back in the days you assumed, like, I'm a Buddhist, you're a Muslim, and he's a punk and she's a reggae and he's a hard rock fan, and they are some other native religion, and we got the best of the manners, and we got some sort of exciting mix between foods, faiths and gods and all that. But multiculturalism is what it is. It's multiculturalism in the same place. So I mean, you can't combine Swedish culture with this new incoming culture, and cultures don't change overnight. The thing is, Sweden is so it has this image of itself as being like the top of the mountain, sort of morality and of everything. So they think, I mean, the status quo that's been ruining in the country for the last years, they think that just as long as you come into the sphere of Sweden and sort of breathe into that air, you're gonna be changed. If like they do now, for example, they are patting the shoulders of ISIS fighters, terrorists, traitors, people who came to Sweden or who were born in Sweden. So they are either direct migrants or second generation or something, and they go there and they come back and they are supposed to be given flats and jobs, and the sort of, we need to sort of make sure you get a good foot into society. How much foot do you need into society? That's crazy. And because they have this idea that their society is sort of it eats up the culture, sort of. If the system is ideal, well, the culture is going to be ideal, and that is wrong, because where I'm right now in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which has a good, people have good manners and all that, but there's a problem with the culture, because it doesn't matter if it's a dictator or according to some, a good dictator, or this so-called democracy that the region has now. I mean, the neighboring countries too. People are always sort of in this tribal mode of either so-called ethnicity, even though people here look the same, you know, speak the same language, so that's just nonsense. But you know, religion, party politics. So if you take, for example, Croatia, which is almost 100% sort of Catholic, I mean secular, you know, like, yeah, they still have divisions between left, right, this party, that party, and whatever. And so that's just part of this culture here. It still has to sort of elevate enough. I mean, there are so many good aspects here, but it still needs that sort of critical turnaround that makes it into a more functioning society, politically speaking. So we have different aspects of culture. We have like this sort of basic, you know, human rights aspect. You know, I don't want to take something away from you. I don't want to hurt you. And then we have this sort of political, corrupt level. We have various levels. And when you mix too much of them, things go crazy. So people within Europe have an easy time mixing and, you know, moving to this country, that country. You know, Southern Europe, I mean, this problem in Bosnia is also prevails in Italy, Spain, and you know, all these southern countries. That's just, you know, it's the sort of corrupt belt, if you want to say it like that. But on the other hand, Sweden is corrupt too. It's just that there is still enough money leftovers for everyone to just keep quiet and be satisfied. But anyway, and this is my idea that culture is the most important thing, and culture can change, but it takes so long for that to happen, basically. So when you have this forced multicultural society, problems arise because it can be either this sort of pop version of it, you know, like, oh, I eat this kind of food, you eat that kind of food, oh, we're so multicultural, or, you know, you have your traditional forkware and I have mine, wow, that's nice. I mean, that is nice, nobody complains about that, but that's because the manners, the cultural level of manners is according to that certain country. Sort of like in the US, people become Americans and then they sort of spice it up a little bit with their heritage and stuff, and reinvent their heritage and all that, because, you know, once you change your culture and society, you're no longer part of what you were before. If you adapt to it, you become something new. But here in Europe, the problem is with the influx of people with this kind of primitive culture as we have in Sweden. It's a hard problem because Sweden is so nice, you know. Afghanistan says no, we don't want those people back. So what can Sweden do? They're so cute. I mean, it's really pathetic. And that's the thing, because in a homogeneous society, for example, to have Sweden again, where people are sort of the same values, you know, they can have different opinions about how tax money is going to be used, military and all that, but they still have this sort of manners, you know. So people, I understand that they have this sort of idea, oh, we are so good, the system is so good. It just takes a person to come here, breathe the air, and everything will change. And perhaps it does for some people, for some cultures who are very close to it. There's this sort of minimum level requirement of some sort of cultural resonance. And of course, I'm not saying everyone coming from countries like Afghanistan is like that, but those who come are men who claim they are boys, and you have seen those photos in Sweden where they sort of sit in the laps of politicians and they are men with beards and stuff. That's hilarious. I mean, what goes into the mind of the people there? And, you know, people who work in this sort of centers where they receive people and they, you know, check them in and all that, they know this is going on, but they can't do nothing because it's their job and so on. So that's the naive thing, and that's where multiculturalism fails, basically, and where the system won't help you. And let me tell you one thing, as long as people can complain, that's a good sign of some sort of free speech, because if you can't complain, that's bad. If you can complain, that's good. Now, whether some things will change or not, that's another story. So that was that I wanted to share, because it's so fascinating to see all this go on and how this influx of culture coming into countries. And for example, like in Sweden, where you can have, for example, just before I end the video, someone who comes to Sweden, works, you know, becomes a baker, pizza baker or something else, and then they are being forced to leave Sweden after some years because they earned too much money, or I mean, you know, their boss didn't fill out some paper correctly, which the worker doesn't know about, while people who come and, you know, rape and commit crime, attack old people, use the system, who will just ruin the cultural balance in Sweden, they are allowed to stay and be sort of subsidized in their sort of detention homes for youth or prisons, and after that they will be released. And that's so typical of Sweden. Most of the time a criminal kills someone or does something horrible, police always knew about that person. You know, that person has committed violence against someone's theft and all that, but the system like lets you pass along all until you do something horrible. So yeah, that's why culture is very important to say, and that's why I've been making videos. I had a streak there, well, like 2 months ago, where I talked about you know, tribalism versus meritocracy and all that. And this is something very important, and it needs to be talked about in this world we live in, that culture is the most important thing we have, and that's more important than the system. So in my opinion, the sort of Western ideal of freedom of speech, movement, transactions and all that, that's the best ground for creating a good culture, because in that culture everyone can thrive, and that culture is also one that allows self-criticism. So the markers of a good culture is that it allows self-criticism, it allows everyone to sort of be themselves. That's that. What more can you ask for? That's a good starting point. And if we lose that, as I've said before, we might be the only sentient beings in the universe, and if Europe is the cradle of some sort of idealistic society, if we lose that, the whole universe loses that. So take care and all the best.